Josh?
There we go.
Okay, thanks. So we're going to do this. We're a small group tonight, but and we're going to do this informally. So huge thanks to Jay Morton. Labour Housing Group are getting lots of money's worth, or not money's worth, as we're not paying for any of this. Um, so Jay did a policy day for us. She also did a young persons conference, and then she's rolled forward to tonight's in conversation. Jay was one of the founder members of Architects for Action for Affordable Housing.
Mm.
She also does the Architects for Change podcast. So if you want to catch up with more of Jay's thoughts, there's definitely the opportunity there. And Jay was one of our parliamentary candidates in the 2009 election. Hopefully, will be a future candidate.
2019.
Sorry, 2019.
Yeah,
Yeah,
not that long ago, but long ago, but not that long ago.
all right, no, and hopefully will be a candidate for us at some point in the future. So, Jay, to kick in, the challenge we set for you. So,
Mm.
we want to build 1.5 million homes, but they need to be sustainable. So, they need to be sustainable in terms of carbon emissions. They need to be sustainable in terms of density and the effect on existing communities. So, I don't think there's anybody better in the country to talk about this. So, over to you, Jay.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so I suppose this is the thing, isn't it? For years, we've been talking about the housing crisis. We all know that we've got a housing crisis. We know the housing crisis is affecting well, everyone in the country. It's affecting young people. It's costing us a ton of money. It's costing the NHS money. So there's a sort of social justice issue that we need to be building more homes. And the kind of number of homes that the government want to build within the next term is around about 300,000 a year, or they want to get to that 1.5 million homes. But then we also have the other elephant in the room, which is the climate crisis. And I'm not sure if any of you are aware that the construction industry as a whole is responsible for about 38% of our carbon emissions. So we have the social justice need to house our population. And obviously, it's not just in this country, it's across the globe as well. But then we also have the fact that the construction industry is emitting all of this carbon. And there's lots of, and I think you've mentioned Beth Stratford, who has sort of stated the fact that if we are going to build all of these homes, we will be using the UK's carbon budget if we did nothing else. And also, I'm not sure if any of you are aware of Indy Johar of Dark Matter Labs. I would sort of look up some of the work and some of the stuff that he's been saying about this as well. I mean, he would say that we can only build 15,000 homes a year and stay within our carbon budget. So there's a real sort of a real challenge here. And I think, I mean, maybe as soon as I'm talking about carbon, maybe we'll start with carbon, even though I've actually put my slides in a completely different order. But you know, I think there is an opportunity here that the construction industry is notoriously slow to innovate. We have been building in the same way that we always have been building. Tall buildings are out of concrete, small buildings less so, everything is clad in brick. So, it's partly because of aesthetics, it's partly because contractors don't want to take too much risk. So we're not really investing and innovating in new methods of building. And then there is also that extra risk level of alternative construction methods. Everyone's concerned of what we might have to deal with later. So thinking about things like Grenfell, thinking about historically you had Ronan Point. Sometimes historically our sort of new ways of building haven't always turned out the best way. But that doesn't mean to say we shouldn't be changing how we build, and we should be innovating. And I think the sort of carbon question is actually the opportunity to innovate. And I don't think the government are actually like paying attention to that yet enough. So I think that's the sort of key thing to start thinking about. But maybe before I go into the sort of deep dive into carbon, I'll just share a sort of few thoughts and slides about I'll do the little weather girl thing. I think that could be quite fun. There we go. So you get my little face in the corner. To sort of go almost touch back to your question about density as well as carbon. And I think the first question is, how do we want to live? We're going to build these 1.5 million homes. Where are they going to be? How do you want to live? What is a sustainable way of living? And I think I am quite concerned that a large proportion of the homes that might be built might end up being this sort of what I would call the bog standard housing model, which is not necessarily sustainable. Yes, these homes in the picture are likely to be timber frame construction. They're clad in brick, but it's a sea of hard standing. So whilst you might be measuring the embodied carbon, which I will explain a little bit more what that is later, of the buildings, we also don't like acknowledge the sea of tarmac and the sea of concrete, which is not only a lot of carbon that's gone into creating this material here, but also you've got to also think about the other knock-on effects, such as surface water runoff, lack of biodiversity, heat island effects. So when you've got our more extreme summers that we're getting, too much concrete makes everything hotter, makes it hard, harder to deal with, means more of these homes are likely to need air conditioning, which is going to create more carbon again. So we're sort of stuck in a bit of a vicious cycle if we carry on building cities and planning them, towns and cities, in the way that we historically have been. But this is the bog standard house builder model, because they like doing this because it's easy. They think it sells. It sells because not everyone has been shown what good looks like or what better can look like. So and also they hold a lot of power because they have a lot of money, they hold a lot of land. So, but I think we do need this sort of climate change, housing crisis conundrum actually is an opportunity to actually rethink and change how we build and not just fall into the same trap of doing what we've been doing before. And maybe I might be biased in this because obviously I'm an architect, but I think this is where we need deep thinking into how we build. We should be utilising the talent and knowledge that we have in the country. We should be talking to urban designers. We should be talking to architects. A lot of what you're seeing on the screen would have had no architectural input whatsoever. And also, it could be anywhere. I mean, where are these images? We don't even know. So it's also, they're not creating great places. I think these places are what I maybe would call like 2-meter places, where to get anywhere, to go to the shop, to get a pint of milk, to take your kids to school, to go to work, you step out of your house, you walk 2 meters, you get in your car, you drive to where you need to go to, you walk another 2 meters, and so it's also sort of feeding in the sort of the health pandemic as well. It's not good for us. It's not good at creating communities, because as soon as everyone comes home, they just set foot in, they just open the door, go indoors, and that's it. So I think we also need to be thinking about the other health epidemic, which is loneliness. So I'm actually firing a hell of a lot at you just from this one image, but we can kind of see that there's a multiple of challenges and a multiple of crises. And if we are going to build these new homes, we need to be stripping right back, understanding all the problems in society. And through this sort of creating new places, maybe we can start to solve them through innovation in design, innovation in materials, and thinking about how we want to live. And actually, that question, referring back to my podcast, there's an urban designer called Gil Penalosa who set up 8 and 80 cities. And he basically says that if you create a place that works for the 8-year-old and the 80-year-old, it works for everyone. So I definitely would recommend looking at some of the work that he's doing. But one of the big questions he asks is, how do we want to live? And I think that's what we need to be asking ourselves every time we're looking at a development, every time we're going to a planning committee, every time we're looking at building new homes. Because we don't want to be creating non-places. We want to create places that make people feel proud of where they live, that aren't places where people might be lonely, create health and well-being, and also don't add to the sort of carbon challenge as well. And just to sort of, this is a page from I'm probably going to be throwing a lot of books at you. Diana Bornat of ZCD Architects, she's just released a book called All to Play For, which is a book about housing, and it's got full of really, really great case studies. And the page from this book I've pulled out is really interesting, because every single project here is the same area. And this is your typical house builder model, which is like the slide that you've just seen before. That will give you 38 homes per hectare. And then this is the sort of ratio of hard standing to green space and the sort of quantity of shared open space per home. Slide down to the bottom. This is a project, it's not a Bell Phillips project. It's I think it's Howes Architects actually, but this is Portloop by the quite innovative developer Urban Splash. And you can see here that will give you 72 homes per hectare. So the bog standard house builder model is also not going to, it's not only like not as sustainable, not as interesting, not as a great place to live, it's not going to hit the numbers. So this has probably had no architect input. And all the others, bear in mind this one here has got less, but that was more specific to the site and the type of dwellings they wanted to create. That's a scheme in Copenhagen. But it has a hell of a lot more green space than this one. But this one here is giving you more numbers and actually, I would argue, a better place to live. So that's an image of it. It's in Birmingham by the canal side. And actually what they've done something quite simple is rather than doing the sort of fenced off gardens, they've opened them all out. So actually every child that lives here has access to a much larger quantum of open space to play. It creates a better community. Everyone has their like little terrace area, and it's actually a much better place to live, better in terms of biodiversity, and it's really, really successful in terms of community, which is very, very different to the sort of the images made from the slide, that they all look quite pretty, but they're not sort of delivering this sort of that extra alternative way of living. And I think if you're going to build and you're going to spend the carbon, we need to do it in the best we can in terms of dwellings. And obviously not all dwellings are going to be low. If we're going to be building high, we don't want this. We don't want a non-place. We want to be creating sort of interesting places to live. And I know I'm just throwing in a plug of the project that Andy will know very well. If we are building a slightly taller, I am aware that the Mark Lake Court development in Bermondsey is not as tall as the scheme I just put there, but it is a sort of higher density dwelling in an inner city, and it's designed in a way to sort of incorporate more communities. It's more sort of in line with the place. It's sort of referencing the existing estate. And actually what's interesting about this, it's an infill development. And I think this is the other sort of way of innovating, is actually about looking at the stock that we have. And this scheme was 25 new homes, but it actually benefited 100 families because, I mean, Andy will know all about, and John, and many of you will know all about this already, by looking at the existing estate, moving people around who are willing to move. Some people were in overcrowding, some people were under occupying. Actually, this one development of 25 homes actually unlocked and helped 100 families all in all. So I think we also need to be thinking about more chain of benefit as a sort of efficient way of building, and this is where sort of infill developments can come from, and it also then enables communities to stay together. So that was just sort of a little plug for that one. And I'm just going to actually skip to then talking about the sort of carbon challenge, because that was your earlier question. But I think of buildings, I'm sorry if I'm going all around a little bit, but the big, because I've mentioned carbon a few times so far, so I think we should just sort of just jump to the like what is carbon. The first thing you've got, which I think everyone understands a bit more because it's our energy bills, is the embodied carbon and of how much our buildings emit in terms of energy. So your gas, your electricity. So that's what you'd call operational carbon. So this is if you built a new build that's building regs compliant. Existing buildings, the operation will probably be a hell of a lot more, like your Victorian terraces that are leaking everywhere. The operational carbon will be a hell of a lot more. But that's if it's 67% embodied carbon, which is the carbon that goes into making the building. So all the stuff, the transportation of the brick, the transportation of the concrete, the transportation of the timber, all those things, the actual making of the concrete, all of that, the manufacture of all the bits that go into the building is what you call embodied carbon. So that's if you do a new building that's building regs compliant. If you do better, so more like to passive house with like low operational systems, then the whole life carbon comes down and your operational carbon comes down to 23%. So that's if you've got air source heat pumps, much more energy efficient building, better than building regulations. But then then you've got 50% of that is embodied carbon. So now the next thing to look at is the embodied carbon. And what goes into embodied carbon? That's the sort of superstructure, which is, the superstructure, which is 46%. So that's the structure of the building. So if it's the small little houses that I showed you there, then that will be the timber frame, for instance. If it's a larger building, then you're looking at sort of concrete, and when you are looking at concrete, that's where the superstructure gets to about 46%. Substructure is below ground. The facade is like the brick and the insulation, and then the internal finishes kind of says what it says. And MEP is like the pipe work, the boilers or air source heat pumps, and all the sort of bits that kind of, it's mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, basically. That's what MEP is. So all of that is embodied carbon of that is 50% of the building. And go back to what I was saying before, that the construction industry is 38% of our carbon emissions globally. I think it's about 25% in the UK. Then we've already, for new builds, massively reduced what the operational carbon will be of a building. So the next thing to target is embodied carbon. But the big challenge is that any buildings that are tall need to be built out of concrete because of where our fire regulations are at the moment. So this is where we need to start really innovating and testing and thinking about how we build our buildings. And I think you don't need that slide. I mean, first thing is being as lean as possible. So reducing stuff that we don't need. And we've been looking at like taking ceilings out of buildings, exposing the soffits if you're building out of concrete, for instance. So when I say soffits, I mean the ceilings. So rather than putting plasterboard, just expose it, taking stuff out you don't need, trying to think a bit harder about the structure, using as little concrete as possible, but it's still quite challenging. And I think this is where innovation really, really, really needs to come in. And I think as an industry and with government, this is where we need to be looking. And I think it's actually a really great opportunity for the UK economy to actually can create jobs and to actually be innovative. And this is what we're maybe thinking about, how we build our buildings rather than just building. If we're building tall, we could be looking at stone. And I'm going to keep plugging my podcast because actually everyone I've spoken to has just got some really good ideas. There's a really brilliant stonemason called Pierre Badu, who is from the stonemasonry company, and he's basically like a one-man campaigner of wanting stone to be used, not your pretty castles and your pretty churches. You can do that, but also stone is an amazing material that could be used as sort of infrastructure. So it can be used as structure for our tall buildings. It can be used for like our sewer pipes. It can be used for a hell of a lot of things. And he's created this kind of kebab thing where you get lumps of stone and put metal in between them to then create columns and beams. And he's testing that with another chap that I interviewed 2 podcasts ago, Steve Webb, who's a really innovative engineer, who's also really pushing on sort of innovating in construction. But the challenge with building in these ways is that we don't have the infrastructure in the UK at the moment, and we could be investing in that, and it could actually massively reduce our embodied carbon. And then the other ways of building is using other biomaterials such as timber. This is cross-laminated timber, which is like massive plywood. You can build that at height, but not for residential. And I think the sort of jury's out on sort of testing that and seeing if we can push that, if that can come forward with if the building regulations amended, but we need the testing for it and the insurance for it. So our insurance industry also needs to sort of come on board. I think this is where we all need to work together to sort of push through innovation. Someone comes up with a really great product and then somebody else doesn't want to insure it, or a bit like with medicines, it takes so many years for a new system, a new way of building to come on board, but actually we don't have the time. So I always say we need to sort of almost have the equivalent of a vaccine task force to push forward with new ways of building. And it needs to be government, architects, designers, engineers, manufacturers, and warranty providers all need to come together to push forward on this. Otherwise, we're going to be stuck in just building the same way that we always have, tall buildings out of concrete, brick facades everywhere, which I do love brick, don't get me wrong, but there must be a way of innovating to sort of reduce the embodied carbon of that. And then this is actually a building that I'd recommend everyone to go see. It's the external wall is the structure, and it's just stone, and they've just left it unfinished and cut because to save costs, but it's actually part of the structure. So it's another sort of innovative way of building. So I think sometimes aesthetically we're sort of stuck in our ways, whether it be planners, the general public, architects as well. And actually, I think we need to be sort of thinking a bit harder on that, and I think working together. I mean, there's something that we're doing that with where fire regulations are, we're already, as I said earlier, everything tall needs to be concrete. But we're saying, okay, then if you're everything below 4 stories should be bio-based materials. So when I like timber structure, hemp or straw insulation, lime-based render or stone on the facade. And this is was something that we won for the William Sutton Prize, and we're now actually turning this into a real project with Clarion at the moment. So it might be, you know, rather than going back to my very early thing, your sort of new towns looking like this, maybe they could, if they look like that, they will actually be, the embodied carbon in those buildings would be a hell of a lot less. But it takes a brave developer to want to do something slightly different. And like these ways of building are actually very old, building out of timber and lime render and hemp insulation. But even to get a contractor on board, and when I say contractor, I mean a builder who wants to build in this way, they prefer to do the first image, the stick building with brick facade, brick on the outside, for instance. So I think there's a lot of sort of different players at play that need to sort of come together, whether it to sort of reduce the way that and improve the way that we're building and make change. That was quite a long sort of answer. I don't know if there's more questions to add to that.
Yeah, Jay, can I come in with an initial question? So,
Yeah.
thanks for highlighting Mark Lake Court. You always get kind of facilitating points for mentioning something that the facilitator's been involved in. Okay, my background is in housing management, and obviously kind of Grenfell's made us all as beyond nervous. And I think what one of the lessons is that the people on the ground, the people in kind of Kensington and Chelsea didn't understand cladding. And we're probably there in terms of the kind of biodiverse products for the kind of lower buildings. So how can you kind of raise awareness when kind of our obsession probably rightly is around building safety at the moment?
In what way? So you mean if you were building in this way that I'm showing here below
Yes,
4
yeah.
stories? Well, I suppose it's the thing where the regulations come into play. But I suppose the point about Grenfell is that it wasn't bio-based materials, and actually the insulation that was used, the chemicals that came off of that when it burned was also part of the issue as well. And I think this is where the sort of testing, timber can be oversized. There's ways of sort of working with it within sort of fire regulations, which I think we sort of, and I think this is where the sort of testing needs to come in with confidence. But actually more the challenge with timber is insurers are more concerned about water.
Oh, right. Okay.
If you see, so yeah, fire is an issue, but we understand if you have a timber joist, if it's sized accordingly, then it chars. So then this is why they need to, it is the height is below 4 stories, because it's that sort of time between in terms of escape distance. But it's I think it's the sort of widely understood more the challenges is at height, but in other countries they do look at doing CLT, cross-laminated timber is being used for tall residential buildings. Again, there's dispute about that, and this is why I think I come back in saying that we need to sort of almost, rather than just saying we can't use something, we need to be pushing harder on testing, whether it be with cross-laminated timber or whatever other new construction methods that might come on board, so that we can feel confident within ourselves. And I think this is where the sort of testing of construction methods needs to come in.
So Jack's got a good question, but I just wanted to push a little bit further. So Grenfell's left us all with a deep skepticism about the regulator and and the kind of competency of the regulator. The other thing is that those of us who are kind of responsible for commissioning the building are very kind of conservative with a small c. So if we commission a building and subsequently there's kind of building safety concerns, what one, kind of a whole load of money's wasted, but two, our kind of careers are wasted as well, which does lead to that kind of, that conservatism. So you're doing great work innovating, but how do you kind of spread that out to people who are going to be paying for your buildings, Jay?
Well, so who's paying? This is actually the other conversation that actually Steve Webb and I had in the podcast, and I think we came to the really good point that the industry has become quite fast-paced. Programs have been strained when actually the way that you can save money and carbon on a building is more thinking time. So as an example, because of safety, building, engineers, because of the time they've got to work things out, quite often they oversize. It's quicker. If they've only been given a short amount of time and they haven't really been paid a decent enough fee, then it's just better for them to reduce their risk to just oversize concrete, for instance. So we're actually pouring a hell of a lot more concrete into our buildings than we need to, which is a hell of a lot more cost and a hell of a lot more carbon. But actually, if there was more money invested in thinking time, the fees were more for professionals to take a little bit more risk. Because this is the thing, it's all about risk. But risk quite often ends up just means we end up having to be a bit everything just gets pushed further down. So the engineer won't want to take on as much risk. They're not being paid enough to take on as much risk. So therefore they oversize all of the beams. You end up spending a hell of a lot more money on concrete and on material and carbon. So I think there is there is something that needs to be considered where with design teams, for us to, we are all supposedly professionals, right? But we need the fees and the time and the program to do that thinking time, to do that innovation, to come up with better ideas where we can actually maybe reduce the unnecessary material in a building, use alternative materials, also think about different ways of laying out our master plans and our buildings and thinking about sort of creating better density, creating better places. All of that will comes with thinking time, which actually as a percentage of the cost of a building is actually quite small. But I think that's something that needs to come back because I think within the whole industry, it's very, very constrained. And we can do better, and we can also we're a bit more collaborative with each other as design teams and also with clients as well, of what do we want to achieve and then sort of work out how we're going to get there. Then I think we can improve.
One last question before Jack comes in. So, in the Labour Party, I might be being unfair, but I think we're trying to close our mind to the kind of the environmental consequences of building 1.5 million homes, because building 1.5 million homes is going to be really tough. Where's the money going to come from? Where's the land going to come from? And the impact on carbon emissions is obviously kind of really significant. So, other than the work you're doing, Jay, and spending lots of time kind of talking to us in the Labour Party, how can we try and kind of provoke this debate?
Can you rephrase the question? How can you promote? I mean, how can you promote the debate to consider carbon?
About sustainability.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
yeah.
I think this is the silos of government departments, which is a big challenge. So Ed Miliband's doing his thing, Angela Rayner's doing her thing, when actually, and this is what I was saying at the beginning, this challenge of investing in our infrastructure, investing in our places, investing in housing, that is not just Angela Rayner's department. That affects the Department of Health. It massively affects energy and climate change, because if we are if we're investing in better placemaking, we could actually, if we think about what we're doing when evidence-based, we can reduce the budget to the NHS. If we're building not just housing, which just building houses is a good thing anyway, but if we're creating great places and also thinking about intergenerational living. I mentioned with the Marklake Court scheme, that chain of benefit, but actually I've just skipped to this another one. This is a scheme we did in Greenwich, small bungalows, which normally we would say to the clients, don't do that, but they were on tiny little sites that you couldn't really do anything else with. So, but these were 6 sites, each with sort of about 5 or 6 bungalows on them for the elderly. This for Greenwich Council freed up a hell of a lot more homes, but also was better for the residents who moved in. So not only is these people, as an example, not only are they more likely to be able to stay in their home for longer, be healthier for longer, they're still within their existing community, which is better for them, but it also freed up a hell of a lot more homes for other families. That's a sustainable thing to do because you're using your housing stock. It's better. It's also helping the sort of Department for Health. But that sort of wide, like linking all the departments together isn't happening enough. And I think the same with the sustainability point, that they need to be sort of talking to each other. We're looking at GB energy, maybe we're investing in nuclear power, then we're building a ton of all these homes, but actually could we sort of think about investing in innovation in our construction sector, could maybe reduce the demand of energy, create the new homes, also create new jobs for the country, because we maybe might become market leaders in construction and in construction methods, create more jobs. I think it's and create great places to live. And I think all of those things need to link together. And I think at the moment there's not enough of that. And that's, I think, where the challenge is. So I think we should be banging the drum for innovation, and we should be banging the drum for more departmental crossbreeding, if you like.
Which
If
you're
that
doing.
answers the question, does that answer the question?
So banging the drum, you're doing brilliantly, Jay. But
I
Jack's
hope
been
so. I'm not sure enough.
Yeah.
But I think
Jack's been waiting really patiently. So if Jack jumps in.
Oh, hello. Yeah, the banging the drum point, I think, needs to be extremely made. I think a lot of the conversation thus far has focused on sort of construction as an environmental disbenefit.
yes.
If we transition the industry's supply chains and the skills over to building everything with timber, Paul Brannon's timber book says that the construction industry could go from being an emitter to being able to pull down as much carbon per year as a large coal power station previously emitted. And so from an embodied perspective, the disbenefit disappears. It actually helps us get to net zero faster. And then the other aspect of it is obviously decarbonising heat, which broadly, other than implementation, is a solved problem. It's heat pumps and renewable electricity.
Yeah, I think that was my point about the operational. We kind of know how to do that bit.
Yeah.
It's the next bit that you're talking about there that we need to be pushing on.
Yeah, that just needs the drum banging relentlessly. I organised for Paul Brannon to talk at the local branch, but getting a bigger meeting of lots of people would be wise, because he's brilliant.
Yeah. Well, this project that I mentioned here, part of the sort of winning idea is that was also about if all of our buildings that are below 4 stories were out of timber, we can then invest in our forestry as well, because at the moment a lot of our timber that we use for construction is not grown in it's imported.
Yeah.
So, and this is why building out of stick timber, so joists and beams and stuff, is more appropriate for our climate because of the kind of trees that we grow. Whereas cross-laminated timber, which is like the big fat plywood that I mentioned, it's a brilliant material. The trees that we grow in the UK cannot make cross-laminated timber yet. I think they don't grow slow enough. So I think you need to get timber from Europe. So it's imported from Europe. So actually maybe we should be building, and I'm actually basically just totally quoting Steve Webb here. So but he made such an excellent point, and I really would recommend listening to that episode with him because it was brilliant. Of building what's appropriate for the climate that you're in and the way that you build. So we are a mixture of stone and stick timber. If you see what I mean, that's the sort of materials that we can, it's the trees that we can grow and the materials that are appropriate for the country that we have. So it's a bit like with food, isn't it? You kind of the food that we can grow in this country. So our sort of diet historically would have adapted to the sort of food that we could produce here. So actually, our building method maybe should adapt to the kind of materials that we can create. And we do have stone, we do have clay, we do have we can build stick timber. The challenge is to build our 1.5 million homes, will also need to be building tall. But a large proportion of like the new homes are going to be lower density and can be built in the way that such as this project on the screen.
Another aspect, you talked a lot about building the types of places that we want to live and that are actually nice, and typically those are denser and don't have any cars in them. In order to enable a growth of people that don't drive, we need infrastructure that enables that.
Yeah.
And so I know it gets a bad rep and amongst environmentalists, but we do kind of need to bang the drum for high speed 2 as an enabler of further, because high speed 2, if it was built as designed, would have enabled about 3.5 times as many intercity rail journeys. And currently our intercity rail system is at capacity. But yeah, that's sort of tangential, but yeah.
Well, I think this is also, so, okay, if we're building, going to keep going back to that image. If we're building our 1.5 million homes and we see this kind of thing going up all across the country, there is nothing else here. There's no shops, there's nothing. So there's a hell of a lot of journeys that could be, if you created good places with infrastructure such as shops and places for entertainment and schools and everything you need within walking or cycling distance. But then you also need to, that we can't say that everyone has to stay within where they live. Then having sort of decent public transport and reliable and affordable public transport. So yeah, it might be that there might be, some people may have cars, or you can have share cars to do those sort of other journeys that you can't quite do by public transport. But you need to, but by investing in that public transport, then you can kind of have a sort of a mixture that then maybe people don't need to use their cars all the time. Families less likely to have 2 or 3 cars. I think there is this, that's again that sort of social justice element to it as well, isn't it? I think we need to understand people do need to get around, but every household having 3 cars, I think it depends where you are. If you're in the city, can do totally car free. If you're out of the city, maybe in where one of the new towns are, it may be that families will still need 1 car, or will be able to adopt a sort of share car approach, but maybe they don't need to be on the street. They could all be in what people call car barns, but you still have good buses and good public transport. So we can start to reduce our car ownership and start to sort of wean ourselves off it. Because I think we all, if you show someone what's a great place to live, which quite often, great place that you go to in Europe, some of the people, if someone showed you a photo from their holiday, it would probably be from a beautiful square that has no car on it. So we know that we like it, but trying to wean people off of it is a challenge. And I think we sort of need to bring people along with us. And you're right, by investing in, you need to, the public transport needs to come first. You can't expect somebody to get rid of their car and then try and rely on a bus that's like once a day. The transport needs to come first. And again, it'll be better for our health. We'll be walking more.
We're small enough to be informal and people just jump in.
Yeah.
The bit of chat you missed, Jay, is that John asked for a link for your podcast and Joss has just dropped it in the
Great.
chat for
Yeah,
us.
do listen.
You should have insisted on it as part of you doing your talk, Jay.
Yeah, the sort of research. Well, and actually, there's another one, a really great master planner and architect called Jazz Balla, who has done a lot of sort of new towns work. He was one of the earlier episodes. Again, I mean, yeah, these are all people that you could get on as well in future. But I think that was quite an interesting one, also talking about car ownership. But it's all the things that sort of feed into when we're looking at a new place. We do also need to understand how people live, and be sort of realistic about it as well. And I think that element of realism, bringing people along with you, giving people good alternatives, but I think there is also a bit of a sacrifice that we all need to make as a nation as well. But it shouldn't be a hard sacrifice. But I think there's a little bit we all have a role to play in sort of reducing our car ownership.
So Heather, John, Les, John, anybody I've missed, please just jump in with your questions.
Could I just ask, how much progress on this do you think can sort of realistically be made in the next few years, by the time of the next election? Do you think it's something that could start to move quite quickly once there's some momentum behind it? Or...
Do you mean in terms of construction innovation, or placemaking, or everything?
Sort of everything, and also I guess, and I know you sort of said that everything's sort of linked up, but what would you say is the sort of first step that could catalyze,
So they're already looking at new towns. There is a lot of conversation about good design. We want good placemaking and we want good design. But I think there needs to be an understanding of the value of what good design is, and the value that the talent that we have in terms of architects and master planners can bring. I think at the moment, I think my industry are sort of at fault, and I've even been mindful that even in this conversation, I've used a lot of architecty terms. So if I use anything that just goes over everyone's, and I don't mean that to sound patriotic, but we are terrible at talking in architect speak sometimes, and so we're terrible at communicating with the general public, which therefore means we're terrible at communicating with politicians, which therefore means that a large proportion of society don't even have a clue what architects do, and the value that we can bring to good placemaking. So I was at the Humanise Summit yesterday, which is a campaign that Thomas Heatherwick, if anyone knows who Thomas Heatherwick is doing as part of his Humanise book. So it's another book that is worth reading, and he's on a sort of campaign against boring. And at first I was a little bit against, like, who does he think he is? What's this? He was quite slating of architects, actually, but I have sort of converted over to the campaign. And I was at the summit yesterday, and it was some really interesting conversations. They had scientists, neuroscientists talking about how bland places can make people feel. It's bad for your health, how we need to be sort of demanding more in terms of our places. And I think that's also a social justice. There's beautiful places and there's places that aren't so beautiful. Quite often the beautiful places are more expensive to live than the less beautiful. But why should we not be demanding great beautiful places to live everywhere? Places that aren't bad for your health, places that aren't full of pollution, places that aren't full of concrete, places that have trees, have access to green space. All of these things that during the pandemic, for instance, really became actually really stark, that sort of lack of equality in space and place. And I think we need to, again, it's an opportunity. We're building all these homes, we're building these new towns. This is an opportunity to do it well and to do it right. And I think we need to be looking at good design, we need to be looking at sustainability, we need to be looking at innovation in construction. How quickly that can happen, I think I would say that government needs to understand the urgency of it. They need to be talking to industry maybe a little bit more than they are. I know they've got their task force, so they are trying. I think they've got a lot on their plate, so that's probably part of the issue. But so yeah, how fast? I think I think the I think maybe we need government and society to be asking the right question, and maybe we're not asking the right question. You guys are asking the right question because you asked it, but maybe not everyone's asking the right question yet. So maybe it's up to all of us to bang the drum to make sure that the right question is being asked. It shouldn't just be like we are going to deliver 1.5 million homes. Who can deliver them the fastest and the quickest? And what site can be enabled quicker? It should be, we're going to deliver 1.5 million homes. How should we be doing them? How can we do them in the lowest carbon way possible? How can it benefit? How can we innovate? And how do we want to live? And maybe we're not asking those questions yet. I might be wrong, so everyone correct me if I'm wrong.
Can I just quickly jump in? I think this is, I mean, I absolutely agree with everything you're saying. And from my perspective, some of what you were showing, I think is great. I mean, that picture of the kind of, the little boxes on the hillside is my idea of hell. I would hate to live somewhere like that. I would absolutely hate it. But I wouldn't mind.
I'm on share so I can see everyone. I don't know how I do it. I'll stop share. There we go. There we go. I can see everyone.
I don't know how we persuade everybody that isn't the ideal. If you ask, I've seen stuff saying when you ask a lot of children to draw a house, even if they live in, a block or even a low-rise block, they'll draw something with a pitched roof and a door in the middle and 4 windows. That's a house. And so many people, that is their ideal of where they want to live. They want their own front yard, their own backyard, and only one staircase to climb up. So I think it's a kind of wider difficulty of persuading people that that isn't necessarily the ideal. And I think we have to be providing all the things that you're talking about, you know, the transport infrastructure, all the other things. I mean, it's what makes it absolutely workable, because I can think of a few you know, small estates that are not very far from where I live. I'm in Camden, so just around the corner, where they were built by Camden, you know, some years ago now, 30 odd years ago, and they had shops on them. Well, those shops are not there anymore because nobody used them. They all either got in their cars and went to the supermarket, or I mean, locally to us in Kilburn, you can at least get the bus down to a reasonable sized supermarket. So where you see those kind of community spaces, they're not necessarily well used. And the reason for that is there's not funding there to be able to put things in them to make them work. So I kind of worry about it, because I think, how will we get to a stage where we are building what people actually want, where they really do want to live, but also fulfills all those criteria of being a bit innovative? Yeah,
I think again, I think it's so. Let's say if you're working with communities, I think again it's like asking the right questions. So rather than saying draw a house, it's how much play space would you like to have? If you didn't have a fenced off garden, but actually opened up all the gardens with all your friends, then you'd actually be able to play with your friends, and you'd have access to a much larger garden. How much light do you want in your home? How much would you like to, do you like to see trees out of your window or not? And I think it's almost unpicking the question a little bit more. And then I think your other point about the shops and everyone going to the supermarket, I think this is again at a sort of council level, planning level, of understanding the knock-on consequences. So we have a challenge with our high streets, as an example, across the country. Our high streets are struggling. And then you'll have a local authority trying to invest or trying to come up with ideas on how to regenerate the high street. And then at the same time, the same local authority will approve a planning application for an out-of-town Next or an out-of-town Marks and Spencer's, and then wonders why nobody's going to the high street, when actually that is again promoting your car use. Everyone's driving to Marks and Spencer's, whereas instead maybe improve the bus connection to the local high street. Don't approve the out-of-town Next and Marks and Spencer's or whatever it is. I mean, I have it in my own hometown of Bognor Regis. Hardly any of like big flagship stores are there anymore. Yet there's now a Next, Marks and Spencer's food hall, all in the sort of awful, horrible place out, 5 minutes out of town, next to the big Tesco, next to the big Sainsbury, next to the big Lidl, sea of car park, and people drive there at the weekend to go to the Next. Whereas if the Next was in the town centre, they probably would go there instead. So again, it's the sort of lack of joined up thinking.
I am a little bit unsure of this, because it almost is as if going to an out-of-town supermarket or shopping village or whatever is like the thing to do. It's the entertainment. Is let's take the kids to IKEA on a Saturday or a Sunday. It's absolutely heaving. I was on the train on the overground on Sunday, going to visit my mother on Mother's Day, and there were hundreds of people with kids on the train, and I thought, oh, I wonder if they're all going. Well, actually, no, they all got off at Shepherd's Bush to go to Westfield, because that's what you do for entertainment. That's the way. And actually, it's not about shopping. It's about going out, having a family event. People don't even buy anything when they get there, but they're just. It's just. I don't know how we change that. Because probably when they buy things, they do it online and it gets delivered.
But this is also, I suppose, having other spaces that aren't just about spending money, and that can be in the high street. It can be in terms of public space that because that's the other thing. All access to community space and outdoor space shouldn't just be about where you can spend money, and have places where you can dwell without spending any money is also quite important. It also, again, encourages community interaction. But I think this goes back to that point of every sort of decision that needs to be made. We need to understand what's the wider, strategy for a town or a place, and if that, whether it be that out of town shop going there, if that almost sort of is going to pull away from what the strategy for the town is, then it should be not approved. But I think that at the moment there's not enough joined up thinking in that respect.
Oh, sorry, John's prodded me to say that Les has been waiting. Sorry, Les.
Hi, Les.
Okay?
Hi, folks. Yeah, just wanted to, I suppose, develop the conversation, but looking at the role of housing associations. So, housing associations will be playing a big role in terms of the 1.5 million new homes, and particularly given their constituencies, lower to medium affluence households. And when I was looking at the first photograph of the kind of housing estate, it kind of made me think that there may be a question really around whether housing associations are colluding with developers in kind of mediocre design, particularly with Section 106 deals and package deals. I suppose the question is: are housing associations colluding with poor design and adding to issues around carbonisation, or are housing associations assisting with that agenda?
I don't know. I suppose I wouldn't say everyone's colluding. I think it's the sort of bog standard way of doing things. I feel I've been quite mean to the big house builders, but they can take it, I think. I think they know how much it costs a bit. Again, the whole construction industry, profit margins are actually quite tight in risk. If you do anything slightly different, then your sort of risk is increased. And when I mean risk risk of program, risk of planning, risk of and time on site, all of those things. It all costs money, and actually the sort of markup and profit margins for the construction industry isn't maybe as high as for other industries. Maybe if you're selling coffee, it's 100% profit on your coffee. Maybe I'm being a bit too generalizing a little bit more, but I think the big thing is risk. And the big house builders, they can just churn it out. They know exactly how much that house costs to build. They know exactly how to build it. They know how quick it is to build it, and they will just lay them out in whatever, that very sort of simple fashion. They know that it will sell because if everyone's got 2 car parking spaces in the front, all of those things, that it's what's sold before, so in their mind it will sell again. And I think a lot of it is about risk and speed, and it's just sort of churning it out in a way, and we're not stopping and thinking maybe we can do things better. Doing things better might take a bit more time. It's a bit more thinking time. There probably is a little bit of an extra sort of profit risk there, and I think that's the challenge. As everything always comes back down to money, depressingly. But maybe better design could generate better value, and maybe you'll actually get more value out of the places if we do them better.
On that point specifically, it kind of links back to the previous point. Is if we build little boxes on the hillside, people buy little boxes on the hillside. If we build Westfields, people go to Westfield. If we build out of town shopping centres, that's what people do. I think there is a certain need to sort of reclaim the built environment. Why do we commoditize housing as a thing that private capital develops, builds, and sells for a profit, which creates this incentive for them to do the same thing over and over again, where realistically it would be far better if we decided as a society, this is the type of housing and built environment that we want, this is the outcomes that we're achieving by designing it in this way, and then we're going to spend money on it, regardless of how much we can sell it for at the end of the process of building it, because it'll have the economic and social outcomes that we want, in the same way that we already do for infrastructure. You know, nobody says, oh, we're not going to build this hospital because we can't find someone to buy it. Like, you know, I'm just sort of.
Yeah, I think there's, as one of our priorities for the action of Architects Action for Affordable Housing campaign is trying to sort of encourage smaller house builders to diversify the system, which I think will be better, and also providing opportunities for some sort of smaller infill sites for community land trusts and self-build as well, to sort of really kind of diversify the market a little bit more rather than it relying on the main large house builders. And I also think they can kind of be a bit nimbler as well. You can get the sort of smaller house builders and SMEs. So I think that's quite an important point, and I think that's again a role that the government can play to sort of encourage and incentivize and facilitate smaller, more innovative house builders and community land trusts, etc. And actually, I suppose kind of on your point, at the Humanise campaign yesterday, I wish I had her name. I might have to send it round. Really brilliant woman called, her name was Kate, I think, but she was talking about food, and she's been doing work in Lambeth. It's called the Bite Back campaign, and they've managed to invest in loads of advertising so that all the billboards and a lot of the advertising space in Lambeth will be for their campaign, so that the junk food providers can't advertise in that space. But she's sort of got a bit of an issue with like the large supermarkets and you know, your Sainsbury's and your Tesco's, they're everywhere, small ones, big ones in the city. And again, that same thing, the offer when you walk in for food, you don't really have much of a choice, but to sort of buy, you know, a lot of it's in packaging, a lot of it's ultra processed. There's a lot of stuff that shouldn't exist. And she's saying we're expecting individuals to make better decisions on our health, yet you walk into a Sainsbury's and you are just flooded with temptation of stuff that we should not be eating. And they're on our high streets everywhere. So I suppose it's not quite the same, but it's that similar thing that you're just being offered that, and you actually don't have a choice because that's all you're being offered. Whereas actually maybe if there was an alternative next door, you actually then do have a real choice. And I suppose it's the same within the sort of housing market as well.
It's sort of tangential and a bit silly, but it's a bit like the beginning of I've forgotten the name of the movie. It ends with them blowing up buildings. I've forgotten the name of
Most
it, but
movies do, Jack.
Fight Club.
Yes, Fight Club. Yeah,
Oh,
and
yes.
he's talking about, you know, you get to pick your IKEA furniture, or you get to pick insurance A or insurance B, and realistically, it's not real. It's the
Yes.
illusion of choice. But,
Yes, an illusion of choice. I'm going to see if I can get up the program so I can, because I feel like I've given Kate a disservice by not finding her name. I'm not remembering her name. There was a lot of speakers at the event yesterday. That's why. But if I can get it up, but
Jay, can I just
Yeah, you
check
go.
with you? So we heard Ren in the background when you first came on. Do you need to be putting them to bed at some point?
No,
or-
David's here, so
Oh, right. Okay.
yeah, no, my partner who's also an architect. I can probably give you maybe another half an hour. There we go. I might be able to find it. Here we go. Let's see if I can find her name. Her name was Nikki Whiteman, Chief Branding Officer for Bite Back. I think that's but in terms of, I think look at their campaign, but that was her name. And I think in terms of what she's doing in terms of food in our cities is also another sort of interesting thing about placemaking and community place. And I'd look that up. Oh, you've gone mute. You're muted, Andy.
Thank you.
You're muted again. I think you keep putting your elbow on something.
Yeah, I do. Okay, so Jay made us a really generous offer in terms of her time. Any other questions? Heather, is that you looking to jump in again?
I suppose it's not really a question. I think this is all really interesting, and And I suppose I was just being a bit of a devil's advocate with what I was saying, because I think I agree with what you're proposing. I'm just a bit kind of, I just don't quite know how it's all going to come about, and that's the difficulty, because I suppose somebody's got to make the first move, and somebody's got to be the first person to do it, and it's looking for that, and sometimes we do get innovation, and then but it's few and far between, really.
I mean, I think what is happening is, I think we've had this refresh of a new government, which is quite exciting. And I think the sort of ambition of we are going to build stuff, rather than a government that just continually kept saying, we're not going to build this, we're not going to build that, we're not going to have targets, we're not going to do HS2, we're not going to do all these things. So it feels like there's a sort of energy. And actually, what has happened with that energy is actually a lot of campaign groups and organizations have come about. So the Design Council have released a report, which they want to sort of feed to government. The Architects Action for Affordable Housing campaign, we are going to be launching with the Architects Journal a 20 best. It's not like it's sort of 20 examples of what good housing can be, and it's got a mixture of retrofit, which I didn't even mention in what I was saying before, but I think that's another thing that needs to be considered. I mean, the simple one could be take VAT off retrofit, so that actually retrofitting, we've got a lot of old office buildings that can be done. They don't need to be done badly. They can be done well to create new homes as well. So looking at utilizing housing stock. That's a really quick one. Change the VAT so that actually retrofitting something can be more viable, because actually it's 20% more expensive to retrofit than it is to build new. But yeah, so as part of this document, it's sort of 20 examples of good housing. Port Loop, the one that I showed you earlier, that's one of them. Our Marklake Court schemes in there, and that we want to sort of try and show to government and saying, throw it in the hands of the right people and say, this is what you can do. You can achieve more numbers by doing this as well. So I think I think there's, with the energy, there are a lot of people starting to try and bang the drum and trying to sort of make their voices heard. We just hope that everyone, maybe we're all creating too much noise and they won't be able to listen. I'm not sure. John, you're going to say something?
Yeah, well, you've actually sort of, what I was going to ask about, you've mentioned sort of grey belt land.
Yes.
I mean, how much? I'm not even 100% sure what that is. It seems to be getting mentioned a lot at the moment.
So, again, another person worth looking up is Russell Curtis from RCKA Architects. He's done a lot of research and mapped out a lot of the grey belt land, also a lot of golf courses. I mean, I'm not a big fan of golf courses. And how maybe, they either should be planted and wilded and used as public space, because a lot of these golf courses are actually owned by local authorities, which is insane. But they're only people who play golf and pay tons of money to do so can use them. So either they should be built on or be wilded. But he's done a lot of work with golf courses, but also on the grey belt. And so the grey belt is land in the green belt, which is not necessarily actually that green. A lot of it is like car parks and scrubland. It's not biodiverse. It's not actually, the sort of green and pleasant land. We can build densely near state. A lot of it is near stations, which makes sense to build there. So a lot of these sites that can be unlocked. I think the important point is that they are near transport. I think should be the sites that are targeted first, because that makes the most sense. Because again, talking about carbon and energy and climate change, we don't want everyone driving everywhere. And if they're sort of within and just within London and other cities, there's a lot of land that can be unlocked. Whereas the green belt was just this blanket that actually kind of doesn't make that much sense.
Do you think there's many, talking about not supermarkets, what's the shopping centres, that could come into that, what just aren't used for anything really anymore?
Oh, you mean actual shopping centres?
Actual, yeah.
Could be. So actually, a friend of mine won the Davidson Prize last year, and he did a proposal on converting some of the, like a John Lewis or a Debenhams, because there's a lot of those that aren't being utilised.
Exactly, yeah.
So yeah, I think there's a lot of building types that are in some areas aren't maybe needed so much anymore. There's a lot of office that now, again, with the sort of different ways of working, central location offices really, really close to transport are actually almost becoming more valuable. But the lower grade office in not as good locations is actually become less valuable. And there's a lot of that can be converted into homes. And I think that needs to come into play.
Right. I saw today, I think, just like a headline saying that I think an ex-Debenhams, I think it's in Manchester, has just become the UK's biggest charity shop.
Wow, yeah.
Christ almighty.
But there must be other ways of using. I mean, the old House of Fraser in Chichester that I used to work at when I was a teenager is still empty.
Yeah.
Which makes no sense. I mean, it wasn't purpose built as a shopping centre. It was like it's a mixture of buildings all combined together. It's a school and parts of it are listed, but there must be ways of maybe startup space for businesses, and there must be something that can be done with it rather than just leaving it empty.
Yeah.
Because it's bad for a community as well. And I mean, if you look at like the White Whitgift Centre in Croydon,
Yeah, I was
that
just
is
gonna say,
yeah, that is
boulders, yeah.
yeah, that is like damaging sites that people sit on for too long can actually really damage the sort of the opportunities for other businesses in that area, and also thus the business rates that the council can collect as well. So I think there also needs to be thinking about sitting on sites too long that can actually then damage an area, which needs to be considered as well. You have all these ideas. Don't know how we make these things happen, but
Can I ask that guy's name again, Jay? You mentioned
Russell Curtis.
Russell
Yeah,
Curtis.
he's done loads of work on the green belt. He's an architect. I've podcasted him as well.
Oh, that
Yeah.
segued nice into it.
Yeah, yeah. I
Gonna
don't
watch
mean to
it
do
now.
that, but I guess I've had all these conversations. So actually, I mean, each interview is almost like reading a book, a really, really good book, and just getting all these sort of really great ideas
Wow.
from different people. But he's he's a fellow architect of a company called RCKA Architects.
I've heard of them, yeah.
Yeah, he's done quite a lot of work on the green belt, and I think some of that was what sort of the government have sort of utilized some of the research and mapping that he's done.
On the what do we do point, the government recently put out its timber and construction roadmap, and like the various different organizations and groups that it's consulting on in order to actually get that enacted as a thing that is policy. I'm a third year architecture student, so I'm a little bit away from actually being able to do anything like that. But yeah, what is the route into banging the drum in the circles that matter in that sort of realm?
Did you say timber in construction roadmap?
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's been publishing a few years, but the Labour government redid it.
2023 was withdrawn.
This is 2025. I've just put it in the chat.
Oh, put it that I actually shockingly haven't seen that in detail, but I think how do we bang the drum? I mean, I suppose, I mean, you just need to be showing the carbon numbers, how it can benefit. And I think how we can benefit the sort of wider forestry and mapping that out. And I think it is just sort of showing what the benefits are. I think there is still going to be that challenge of building at height. And I think a lot of people will be nervous about that, even though we are doing that in other parts of Europe, for instance. But for office buildings, that's not an issue. We can still be building out of cross-laminated timber. So I think it's about, there's not a silver bullet. I think we've got a suite of tools and a suite of different ways of building that are appropriate depending on what you're building and where. And we need to be using all of them and not just defaulting to the bog standard concrete. And maybe it is, as part of the RBA, well, we already have the sort of sustainability standards, but maybe as part of the sort of planning process, we need to be sort of asking that question: have you done the best that you can?
I think that question is asked sometimes, and what I've seen is that sometimes people come up with these ideas, but then they don't go through. I mean, a really good example of this is Google in King's Cross. I mean, the first building I know that it might have something to do with the fact that Google spent all the money on designing the building, going through planning, and then realized they hadn't spent quite enough money, so they started again from the very beginning. I mean, that must be how Google works. But the first building they came in with was cross-ply laminated timber.
Yeah.
And that is not what they have built.
Yeah. And
that would have been great if they'd have built that, because and it's not actually a tall building. It's a long building, but not a tall building.
It's also office, so you can build out of timber. Whereas
and then they didn't
at height.
Yeah. And so I don't know why they didn't. I've got, apart from, like I say, I think they probably thought we haven't spent quite enough money here, let's spend more. But they didn't do it. I can think of another building where there was an idea for using cross-pipe laminated timber, and they didn't in the end of it.
It's probably skills, to be honest. We have an industry that delivers what it delivers, and so you sort of have to.
I think this goes back to the thing again about contractors and risk and knowing, like, so cross-laminated timber. Not every contractor knows how to, or necessarily is used to building with it. I mean, a contractor building the Google building will be some of the best contractor firms that we have. I can't remember who actually did build it, but also it's like the supply chain issue. So it might have been that building, even though Google have got a ton of money, they still had a budget. So it might be that building out across laminated timber made sense, but then actually because it's all from Europe, there's issues that could come into play there, whether it be exchange rates or leading times or availability. It's less competitive because there's only so many places you can buy it, only so many manufacturers that you can use. So there's all these sort of other things that come into play. But maybe it is about, with everything, and I think with climate change and carbon, whether we're talking about building buildings or manufacturing of items, we need to be understanding the true value or taxing the sort of planetary value to that product and that object. Because at the moment, you save money by doing the wrong thing a lot of the time. Still, you save money buying the crappy item from China that's going to fall apart tomorrow and throw it in the bin than doing the right thing and buying, as an example, like a toaster, for instance. You save money buying the cheap toaster that's going to fall apart tomorrow than you do buying the one that's going to last you a long time, whereas maybe the one that's going to fall apart tomorrow shouldn't have existed in the first place. So I think the market isn't balanced.
It's a false economy, isn't it? Totally.
It's a false economy, but who's paying? The planet's paying, and we're all going to pay in the end. But at the moment, that's not sort of factored into enough, whether it be food, whether it be products, whether it be our buildings. And I think everyone trying to do the right thing, they are sort of taking more risk, and it's costing them more money than people who are doing the wrong thing. And we still have a market that is sort of that way, unfortunately. And I think we just need to be demanding more. But I think this is where it comes back to everyone has a role to play.
Talking of everyone having a role to play, so can I say thanks to everyone on the call? You've asked some great questions, and you're going to make this into a great podcast. Loads of wisdom from Jay, and you said every podcast should be a book. So when's the book coming, Jay?
Oh, every podcast. When am I going to write a book?
Yeah, when are you going?
Well, maybe we'll see. I don't know.
Okay, can I ask you all to tell your friends about it? So there was just too much kind of wisdom and energy from Jay for us to keep to ourselves. So it's going to be available on Spotify. It's going to be available on YouTube. So please kind of help us promote it.
Yeah.
I hope I didn't jump around
huge-
too much. I
huge
felt like there was a
thanks.
hell of a lot of stuff to cover. Sorry.
No, it was great.
No.
It was really good. It was a really good conversation.
So huge thanks to you, Jay, and particularly thanks to Ren for sort of losing them on for an hour and a half or so.
I'll go I think he's probably gone to bed now.
All right. Okay.
See you
Night,
all soon.
everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Cheers. All right.